There's a specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't have a clean name. It's not burnout exactly. It's not depression. It's something quieter. This low hum of feeling like you exist slightly between two worlds, never fully belonging to either one. You remember a time before all of this, before the notifications, before the feeds, before the endless scroll. You remember being bored in a way that felt almost sacred, long summer afternoons with nothing to fill them, phone calls that ended when someone said goodbye, a Saturday that belonged entirely to wherever your feet took you. And yet here you are, unable to imagine a day without the internet, unable to fully trust silence, unsettled by the very stillness you sometimes desperately crave. If that resonates in a way that feels almost too specific, you're not alone. And it's not a contradiction. It's something much more interesting than that. People in this particular space are often labeled in ways that don't quite fit. Too nostalgic to be truly digital, too online to romanticize the past honestly, caught between being called tech-savvy and tech-damaged in the same breath. The culture tends to flatten the experience, either celebrating the adaptability or lamenting the addiction without ever stopping to look at what it actually cost or built in the people who lived through the transition. Because there was a transition, a real one, a neurological, psychological, developmental one that happened to a very specific group of people at a very specific time in history and shaped them in ways that are still unfolding. We're talking about the generation that grew up with a childhood before the internet and an adolescence inside it. Born somewhere between 1989 and 1996, old enough to remember a world without Wi-Fi as a lived reality, not a history lesson. Young enough to have had your identity, your social life, and your sense of self fundamentally reshaped by the time you were in high school. This is a group that researchers are increasingly studying as a unique psychological case, and what they're finding is that the standard narratives have been missing almost everything important. Here's what's actually happening beneath the surface. The human brain undergoes its most significant period of social and identity development during adolescence, roughly between the ages of 12 and 22. During this window, the brain is exquisitely sensitive to social feedback. It's learning, in real time, what is safe, what is valued, what earns belonging, and what invites rejection. Neuroscientists call this the critical period of social calibration. What this means, practically, is that whatever environment surrounds you during those years doesn't just influence you, it trains you. It becomes the baseline your nervous system uses to interpret every social situation that follows. For this generation, that critical window opened just as the internet did. The social calibration that every human brain must undergo happened, for these individuals, partially in digital space, which means the nervous system learned at a foundational level to seek connection through a screen, to manage identity through performance, to measure belonging through response and engagement, not because anyone chose this, but because the environment was there, and the developing brain used it, the way developing brains always use whatever is available. Research from developmental psychologist Jean Twenge and neurologist Francis Jensen both point to the same underlying finding: adolescent brains are not just influenced by their environments. They are, in a very literal sense, built by them. The pathways that form during those years become the default routes. The habits of attention, connection, and self-regulation that develop in that window become the ones the adult brain returns to under stress, under loneliness, under uncertainty. This is why certain things feel the way they do. Why the instinct to reach for a phone when uncomfortable isn't just a habit. It's a trained response wired during the years when that reach was actually how connection worked. Why silence can feel subtly threatening rather than peaceful. Why there's sometimes a strange grief for a slower world that you simultaneously couldn't sustain if you tried. None of this started as weakness. It started as adaptation. The brain doing exactly what it was designed to do, learning the rules of the world it found itself in, building the fastest routes between need and relief. The fact that the world changed so rapidly during those years and kept changing doesn't reflect a failure of the people who grew up inside that change. It reflects the scale of what was asked of them without anyone fully understanding what was being asked. And here's the thing that rarely gets said. This isn't worse than the alternative. It isn't better either. It's different in ways that are still being understood, because this same wiring that creates digital restlessness also creates a particular kind of fluency, an ability to hold multiple contexts simultaneously, a comfort with change that previous generations genuinely don't have, a capacity to build community across distance that was unimaginable to people who only ever knew proximity. These are not small things. They are real cognitive and emotional capabilities developed through real experience, and they matter. But there is a cost, and it deserves to be named. The cost is a kind of chronic in-betweenness, the knowing that a slower, less surveilled, less performed version of life was possible because you lived a version of it while also being genuinely unable to access it now. Not because of weakness, but because the nervous system was built during a seam in history, and seams leave marks. The nostalgia isn't for a simpler time exactly, it's for a version of yourself that existed before you learned to perform yourself, before every thought had a potential audience, before connection required optimization. That version of you still exists. It didn't disappear. It just got layered over gradually by a world that moved faster than anyone had a map for. What the research increasingly shows, and what many people in this group are quietly discovering on their own, is that the path forward isn't about choosing the offline world over the digital one, or dismantling the adaptations that were built during those formative years. It's about developing a conscious relationship with both, about recognizing when the reach for the screen is genuine connection, and when it's the nervous system running an old program. About giving yourself permission to be still, without interpreting stillness as something that needs to be filled. That's not a small thing to learn. It wasn't a small thing to live through. And the fact that most of it happened without anyone acknowledging the weight of it, without a cultural language for what was being asked of a generation growing up inside a transformation no one fully understood in real time, means that many people have been carrying an unnamed experience for a long time. It has a name now. And it makes sense. All of it. If something in this felt specific in a way you didn't expect, that's not an accident. There's an entire psychology beneath the surface of how you move through the world, how you connect, how you rest, how you learn to manage the distance between who you are and who you think you need to appear to be. And most of it has never been explained to you in a way that felt true. Dear viewer, how was our today's video? If you found this video valuable, please consider subscribing to the channel. We post simplified psychology explainer videos daily. If this is your area of interest, you really need to subscribe and turn on the bell icon so that you get notified every time we upload new videos. Share our videos to those who might benefit from them. Give us your genuine comments. We read all comments. We will see you in our next video. Until then, stay safe and stay blessed.